Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
For 15 years, the rhythm of my life was set to the steady, comforting metronome of Elias's habits. The precise click of the front door at 5:45 p.m., the scent of coffee he'd have ready for me in the morning, brewed exactly how I liked it, the low murmur of the classical station he'd play while grading papers at the dining room table. Our life wasn't a whirlwind romance from a movie. It was a carefully constructed edifice of mutual trust, shared history, and predictable comforts. And for the longest time, I believed that was all I ever wanted. Elias was a history professor at the local college, a man who found more passion in the dusty corridors of the past than in the chaotic present. He was methodical, kind, and possessed a quiet integrity that I had always admired. I, Adeline, worked as a marketing coordinator, a job that was the complete opposite of his all about predicting the future, chasing trends, and navigating the loud, shifting landscape of public opinion. We were a perfect balance, or so I told myself. His calm anchored my ambition, my energy pulled him out of his academic shell. Our house in the suburbs was the physical manifestation of our partnership. We had a lawn that Elias meticulously cared for, a two-car garage, and a back porch where we'd sit on summer evenings, sipping wine and watching the fireflies. It was the American dream, packaged and delivered. In that house, I felt safe. I felt known. Elias wasn't just my husband, he was the keeper of my stories, the one person who understood the complex machinery of my mind without needing a manual. "How are the barbarians today?" he'd ask when he walked in, his term of endearment for my corporate colleagues. "They're plotting a hostile takeover of the coffee machine," I'd reply, and we'd both laugh. It was our ritual, a small, daily reaffirmation that this world we had built, inside these four walls, was our sanctuary against the one outside. I never questioned his loyalty. I never had a reason to. The foundation of our marriage felt like bedrock, immovable and absolute. We had weathered family illnesses, career setbacks, and the quiet grief of not being able to have children. Each trial seemed to only reinforce the structure, filling in any potential cracks with the mortar of shared experience. Then, the earthquake came. It wasn't a dramatic, earth-shattering event that you see on the news. It arrived in a thin, sterile-looking envelope from the college's administrative office. Budget cuts. Program consolidation. After 17 years of dedicated service, Elias's position was being eliminated. I found him that afternoon sitting on the back porch, the letter lying flat on the table beside him. He wasn't crying or yelling. He was just staring out at the garden he had so lovingly tended, his face a mask of quiet devastation. It wasn't just the loss of income that broke him, it was the theft of his identity. He was Professor Elias Thorne. Without that, who was he? That evening, the steady metronome of our life fell silent. The comfortable rhythm was replaced by a tense, uncertain quiet. The foundation I had believed was bedrock suddenly felt like sand, and for the first time in 15 years, I was afraid the tide was coming in. The months that followed were a blur of financial anxiety and forced optimism. Elias applied for dozens of positions at nearby institutions, but the academic world is a cruel, competitive place. Each rejection email was another small chip in his already fractured self-esteem. He started sleeping in late, the coffee maker remaining cold and dark when I came downstairs in the mornings. The classical music was replaced by the drone of cable news. Our sanctuary began to feel like a cage. The silence between us grew heavier, filled with unspoken fears and resentments. I tried to be supportive, to be the anchor he had always been for me, but I was adrift myself. My reassurances sounded hollow even to my own ears. Salvation, when it finally came, felt more like a compromise. A state university 5 hours north had an opening. It wasn't as prestigious as his old post, and the pay was less, but it was a lifeline. He got the job. We celebrated with a somber dinner, the relief palpable but tinged with the bitter taste of what it would cost us. "It's just for a year or two," he promised, holding my hand across the table. "I'll work on getting a transfer back here, or you could look for a job up there." "We'll make it work, Addie. We always do." The solution was for Elias to rent a small, furnished apartment near his new campus. He would live there during the week and drive home every Friday evening, leaving again before dawn on Monday. A weekend marriage. We framed it as a temporary adventure, a necessary sacrifice. But as I helped him pack his books and his favorite coffee mug into boxes, a cold dread settled in my stomach. We were surgically separating a life that had been seamlessly intertwined for a decade and a half. The first few months were defined by technology. Our relationship existed on screens. We'd FaceTime every night, a ritual we clung to desperately. He'd show me his sterile apartment. I'd walk him through the garden on my phone, showing him which flowers were blooming. We talked about his new colleagues, my difficult clients, the leaky faucet I had to get fixed. But gradually, the fissures began to appear. The nightly calls became shorter. "I'm exhausted, Addie. I have a faculty meeting at 7 a.m., he'd say, his face a pixelated mask of fatigue. The conversations shifted from emotional check-ins to logistical updates. Did you pay the electric bill? The car needs an oil change. I'll be home around 9 on Friday. Don't wait up. The intimacy was being eroded by practicality. His weekend visits started to change, too. He was a guest in our home, a visitor in our life. He'd arrive late on Friday, drained from the drive, and spend most of Saturday buried in a mountain of papers he needed to grade. Our shared activities, cooking elaborate Sunday brunches, taking long walks, cuddling on the couch, were replaced by a polite, distant coexistence. He was physically present, but his mind was 5 hours away. One Saturday afternoon, I tried to bridge the gap. I put on an old record he loved and walked into the dining room where he was hunched over his laptop. "Let's take a break," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "We could go for a walk. Remember how we used to?" He didn't look up. "I can't, Addie. I have 50 freshman essays to grade by Monday." He gestured vaguely at the screen. "It's just a lot right now." "It's always a lot, Elias," I said, a sharp edge to my voice that surprised us both. "I feel like I'm living with a ghost." He finally looked up, his eyes tired and defensive. "What do you want me to do? This is what's paying the mortgage. This is what's keeping us afloat. I'm doing the best I can." The conversation ended there, but the unspoken words hung in the air between us. He thought I was being demanding. I thought he was being neglectful. We were both right, and we were both wrong. The truth was, we were two people trying to survive in separate worlds, and the bridge connecting us was crumbling, one strained phone call, one canceled walk at a time. The loneliness I felt when he was away was bad, but the loneliness I felt when he was sitting right across the table from me was infinitely worse. The cafe was my midday refuge. It was a place of anonymous bustle, the hiss of the espresso machine and the low hum of conversation a welcome distraction from the echoing silence of my house. I'd take my lunch there when I didn't have a work meeting, losing myself in a book and the comforting presence of strangers. It was there that I met Lachlan. He sat down at the small table next to mine one rainy Tuesday. The place was packed, and he'd asked politely if he could share the space. I'd nodded without looking up from my laptop. But then he spoke. "That's a bold choice for a work lunch," he said, a playful grin in his voice. I glanced over. He was looking at the half-eaten brownie on my plate. He couldn't have been older than 23, with the kind of effortless good looks that seemed both unfair and captivating. He had bright, curious eyes and a smile that reached them instantly. "Sometimes you have to prioritize," I said, smiling back despite myself. That was how it started. A throwaway comment about a brownie. He was a professional model, he told me, waiting for his agent to call. I told him I worked in marketing. Unlike the perfunctory questions from Elias about my day, Lachlan seemed genuinely interested. He asked about my campaigns, about the psychology of advertising, about what I loved and hated about my job. He listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in months. Our encounters became a regular, unplanned occurrence. I found myself adjusting my lunch schedule, a small, subconscious shift in hopes of seeing him. On the days he was there, the world seemed a little brighter. On the days he wasn't, a pang of disappointment would hit me, an emotion I refused to analyze too closely. The conversations deepened. We talked about books, movies, our philosophies on life. He spoke with the unburdened optimism of youth, and I found his perspective refreshing, a stark contrast to the weary pragmatism that had settled over my life with Elias. With Lachlan, I wasn't just a wife managing a household. I was Adeline, a woman with interesting thoughts and a quick wit. I began to change. I started spending more time getting ready in the mornings, choosing outfits that made me feel attractive rather than just professional. I bought a new perfume. I told myself it was for me, a way to reclaim a piece of myself during a difficult time. But a small, honest voice deep inside knew I was doing it in case I ran into him. He was a master of casual compliments, delivered with such sincerity that they slipped past my defenses. "You have a really great laugh," he said one day. Another time, after I'd offered a cynical take on a new ad campaign, he'd looked at me with admiration and said, "You're so smart. It's cool." Each compliment was like a drop of water on parched earth. I soaked them up, feeling a long dormant part of myself begin to bloom. With Elias, I felt like part of a familiar, comfortable landscape. With Lachlan, I felt like a vibrant, interesting discovery. It was a dangerous, intoxicating feeling. I was compartmentalizing my life. There was my life with Elias, a world of shared bills and strained weekend logistics, and then there was my secret, sunlit world at the cafe with Lachlan. I rarely mentioned Elias to him, referring to him only as my husband who works out of town. I didn't want the messy reality of my marriage to intrude upon the easy, sparkling connection I had with Lachlan. It was my escape, and I guarded it fiercely. The first lie wasn't a lie at all. It was an omission. Elias, during one of our stilted evening calls, asked what I'd done that day. "Oh, the usual," I said. Work. Then I grabbed a quick lunch at that cafe near the office. I didn't mention Lachlan. Why would I? It would require a long, complicated explanation about a friendship he might not understand. It was easier to just leave it out. That omission felt like a small, secret thrill, a corner of my life that was mine alone. The web began to spin in earnest when Lachlan came to the cafe one afternoon looking stressed. It's my girlfriend's birthday next month, he sighed, running a hand through his perfectly messy hair. I want to throw her a huge surprise party, but I'm useless at planning this kind of stuff. I don't even know where to start. Before I could even think, the words were out of my mouth. I could help. I organize events for work all the time. I'm actually pretty good at it. The gratitude that washed over his face was like a drug. Are you serious? Adeline, that would be amazing. I'd owe you big time. And just like that, our casual cafe meetups transformed into planning sessions. We started texting throughout the day, links to venues, photos of decorations, debates over playlists. My phone, which had once been a source of anxiety waiting for Elias's perfunctory calls, was now a constant source of excitement. A buzz from Lachlan could turn a gray afternoon into one filled with vibrant possibility. I was investing a staggering amount of emotional energy into planning a party for a woman I'd never met. I told myself I was just being a good friend, that it was a welcome distraction. But when Lachlan would talk about his girlfriend, Maya, a sharp, unfamiliar pang of jealousy would twist in my gut. He spoke of her with such genuine affection, describing their shared jokes and future plans. I found myself fantasizing about being the recipient of that kind of youthful, devoted attention. The situation came to a head when Elias called to say he was thinking of coming home a day early that week. Normally, this news would have thrilled me. Instead, my first thought was panic. But I'm supposed to meet Lachlan on Thursday to look at a venue. Is that a good time? Elias asked, and I could hear the hope in his voice. I thought we could have a nice, long weekend. Oh, sure, I stammered. I just have some social commitments. Oh, anything fun? The lie formed on my lips before I had even consciously constructed it. I'm just helping a friend plan a birthday party. It's gotten a little intense. A friend? Anyone I know? My heart hammered in my chest. This was the moment of truth. I could tell him everything. Or I could take the other path. No, just a friend from around, I said vaguely. Her name is Jordan. I plucked the androgynous name out of thin air. It felt safer. It created a convenient fiction that I could maintain. Elias, having no reason to doubt me, accepted it without question. Well, that's nice of you, he said. Just don't wear yourself out. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. I had just constructed my first deliberate, outright lie. The guilt was sharp, but underneath it was a strange, dark exhilaration. I had successfully created a wall between my two worlds. In the weeks that followed, Jordan became a recurring character in my conversations with Elias. I'd mention our progress on the party, sharing details that were carefully stripped of gendered pronouns. Jordan is really happy with the caterer we found. Jordan and I spent all afternoon debating balloon colors. Elias would ask polite, disinterested questions. Is Jordan pleased with how it's all coming together? Very, I'd reply, my stomach churning. I was living a double life, and the stress of it was immense, but it was also strangely fulfilling. It broke the monotony and emotional neglect that had come to define my marriage. I felt alive, desired, and important even if it was all built on a foundation of lies. The week before the party, the foundation crumbled. Elias called with news that should have been wonderful. He'd managed to get the entire week off. He was coming home. Isn't that great? He said, his voice lighter than I'd heard it in months. A whole week. Just us. My blood ran cold. A week. 7 days. How was I supposed to manage the final, frantic preparations for the party with him here? The constant texts, the last-minute calls, the errands I had to run with Lachlan. My carefully constructed double life was about to collide with my reality. When he arrived, he could sense my anxiety immediately. I was jumpy, constantly checking my phone, ending calls abruptly whenever he walked into the room. Everything okay, Addie? He asked on the second night, his brow furrowed with concern. You seem distracted. Just stressed, I lied, forcing a smile. This party for Jordan is a huge undertaking. You're putting a lot of work into this for a casual friend, he observed, his eyes searching mine. The pressure was mounting. I felt cornered, defensive. Every question from him felt like an accusation, every moment of his presence an intrusion. The sanctuary our home had once been now felt like a prison, and I was the guilty inmate. The discovery happened on Friday afternoon. It was so mundane, so accidental, that it felt like a scene from a poorly written play. Elias couldn't find his phone charger and went to grab mine from the kitchen counter. As his hand reached for the cord, my phone, lying beside it, lit up. It was a text message from Lachlan. I was in the living room and heard him make a small, confused sound. I walked into the kitchen to see him standing there, holding my phone, his face a canvas of disbelief. He wasn't looking at the message itself, but at the preview on the lock screen, the sender's name, Lachlan, and next to it, the round icon of his profile picture. The picture was a professional headshot, clear as day, showing a handsome, smiling young man in his early 20s. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a world ending. He finally looked up at me, his eyes dark with a confusion that was rapidly hardening into something else. Something colder. "I thought your friend's name was Jordan." "It is," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Lachlan is helping too." It was a feeble, pathetic lie, and we both knew it. "And why did you tell me Jordan was a woman?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "I didn't. I never said." "Don't play games with me, Adeline," he snapped, his composure finally breaking. "Every single thing you said was designed to make me believe that. Who is he?" My initial attempts to downplay it were pathetic. I insisted he was just a friend, that I hadn't meant to mislead him, but he wasn't listening. He was connecting the dots, my distraction, my secrecy, my constant texting. The argument escalated, moving from the specific lie about Lachlan to the broader pattern of our last few months. "This isn't about him, is it?" he said, his voice raw with pain. "This is about us. It's about the fact that you've been checking out of this marriage for months. You've been building a whole other life while I've been driving 10 hours every weekend just to feel like I still have a wife." Feeling cornered, defensive, and drowning in guilt, I made the fatal mistake. I went on the attack. "Maybe I wouldn't have to if you were ever here. You're so busy with your own life you haven't once asked me how I'm really feeling. You're being possessive and controlling. I'm allowed to have friends, Elias, male friends. This isn't about you having male friends," he roared, his face flushed with anger. "It's about you lying. It's about you deliberately deceiving me, your husband." The dam of my frustration, guilt, and unspoken resentment finally burst. The words that came out of my mouth were cruel, impulsive, and utterly unforgivable. They were also, in some dark, twisted way, what I had been subconsciously feeling for months. "Maybe I should be with someone younger," I shrieked, the words tasting like acid. "Someone more emotionally available, someone who actually pays attention to me and makes me feel like I exist." The silence that followed was more violent than the shouting. It was a void, sucking all the air and warmth out of the room, out of our 15-year marriage. Elias stood perfectly still, his face ashen. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just gone. The man I knew, the man who loved me, had vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, resolute stranger. He didn't say another word. He walked to the front door, opened it wide, and then turned to look at me, his expression utterly empty. "Then you should go," he said, his voice flat and final. The words weren't an ultimatum spoken in the heat of anger. They were a judgment, a verdict. I tried to backtrack, to apologize, the full weight of what I'd said crashing down on me. "Elias, wait, I didn't mean it. I was just angry." "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "You meant it. You just finally said it out loud." And he turned and walked upstairs. I stood paralyzed in the hallway, listening to the sounds from our bedroom, the opening of drawers, the slide of hangers across the closet rod, the final, decisive zip of a suitcase. Each sound was a nail being hammered into the coffin of our marriage. When he came down the stairs, suitcase in hand, he walked past me as if I were a piece of furniture. At the door, he paused without turning. "I'll come back for the rest of my things next weekend," he said to the empty air. "I'll come when you're not here." The click of the door closing echoed through the house, and then there was only silence. I spent the next 24 hours in a fog of denial and panic. I replayed the fight in my head 1,000 times, wincing at the cruelty of my words. "He'll cool off," I told myself. "He'll call. He'll come back." But the house remained silent, a hollow monument to my catastrophic failure. The night of the party arrived. The thought of going was nauseating, but the thought of staying home alone in that cavernous, silent house was even worse. Maybe, a desperate part of my brain whispered, maybe the party could be a distraction, an escape. Maybe Lachlan could make me feel better. It was the last, irrational hope of a drowning woman. I showed up emotionally shattered. I drank too much, too quickly, the cheap champagne doing little to numb the gaping wound in my life. I watched Lachlan across the room, effortlessly charming, laughing with his beautiful girlfriend, Maya. I saw them through a haze of envy and regret. This was his world, young, vibrant, and full of promise. I was an aging tourist who had mistaken a friendly local for a tour guide to a new life. He noticed my state immediately. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, his brow creased with the same genuine concern that had drawn me to him in the first place. Now, it just felt like salt in the wound. Later in the evening, I saw my chance. Maya was across the room, talking to a group of friends. Lachlan was standing alone by the bar, fueled by champagne and a desperate, self-destructive impulse to feel something other than crushing regret. I walked over to him. "Thank you again for everything, Adeline," he said with a warm smile. You saved me. This party is perfect. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, and in that moment, my entire pathetic, unrealistic fantasy collapsed into a single, reckless action. I leaned in and pressed my lips against his. The rejection was instantaneous and absolute. He pulled back as if he'd been burned, his face a mixture of shock and profound discomfort. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, disappointed clarity. "Whoa, Adeline, what are you doing?" he stammered, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "I'm sorry," I whispered, humiliation washing over me in a hot, sickening wave. "My husband and we had a huge fight. I think it might be over. I feel a connection with you, Lachlan." He stared at me, and any trace of friendliness vanished. His voice, when he spoke, was brutally honest. "A connection?" he said, his tone incredulous. "Adeline, you're old enough to be my aunt. I've never, ever thought of you as anything other than a cool older friend who was helping me out. This is really inappropriate." He glanced over his shoulder toward Maya. "And it's disrespectful. To me, and to my girlfriend." Each word was a precise, devastating blow. "Old enough to be my aunt. Never thought of you as anything else. Inappropriate, disrespectful." He hadn't just rejected my kiss, he had rejected the entire fantasy I had built around him. He had held up a mirror, and for the first time, I saw myself as he saw me, a sad, desperate older woman making a fool of herself. I fled the party without another word, the sound of their music and laughter chasing me out into the cold night air. The drive home was a blur of tears and shame. I had not only destroyed my marriage, I had now annihilated the friendship that I had sacrificed it for. I had traded a 15-year history of love and stability for a moment of humiliating rejection from a boy who saw me as an aunt. The fantasy was dead. And now, so was my life as I knew it. When I got home, the house felt different. It was more than just empty. It was hollowed out. I walked through the rooms and noticed the small absences. The stack of history journals from the coffee table was gone. His favorite mug was missing from the dish rack. His toothbrush wasn't in the holder. He must have come back while I was at the party. He had begun the process of erasing himself from our life. It wasn't temporary. It was final. In the days that followed, I tried everything. I called. His number went straight to voicemail. I texted. Long, rambling apologies that were met with digital silence. I even emailed his university address. All my attempts were absorbed into a void. He had built a wall around himself, and I was on the outside with no way in. Lachlan never responded to my text of apology either. I had made things uncomfortable and strange, and he had wisely chosen to distance himself completely. I couldn't even blame him. The divorce papers arrived a few months later, delivered by a courier. It was an uncontested filing, efficient, impersonal. The legal severing of a bond I had already emotionally destroyed. I signed them on the same dining room table where Elias used to grade his papers, the silence of the house pressing in on me. Now, years later, that silence is the most constant companion I have. The house is still mine, but it has never felt like home again. It's just a collection of rooms filled with memories that taunt me. Sometimes, I'll catch the scent of a certain coffee or hear a piece of classical music, and the grief will hit me with the force of a physical blow. I lost a man who had loved me unconditionally for 15 years. I traded the bedrock of my life for the intoxicating allure of a fantasy, an illusion I constructed to escape a loneliness I should have faced with my husband, not a stranger. The great irony is that I sought friendship with Lachlan to cure my loneliness, and in the end, I was left with nothing and no one. I am more alone now than I could have ever imagined. There is no redemption in this story. No lesson learned that leads to a new and better life. There is only the long, quiet echo of a closed door, and the permanent, bitter taste of regret. I destroyed my own stability, my own happiness, with my own two hands. And that is a truth I have to live with every single day.